So can you just kick us off with name, degree, year, age, slogan, colour?
Okay. Cameron Caccamo. I'm a fourth year art student. History, government majors, if you really care about that.
Cool.
What was next? Slogan and colour?
Slogan, colour, yeah.
Yeah, I'm 21 as well. Slogan is Cack Attack, and I'm going with the colour red.
Sweet. And who's your campaign manager?
Paul Harrison.
Cool. Are you aligned with a political party, Kat?
No.
No? Okay. So how would you describe your political views, your political
Yeah, this is a good question. I would say broadly left-wing, which is not difficult in this current political climate, let's be honest. But yeah, so I find it difficult to align with any one political party, only because there are elements of the two major left-wing parties, I guess you could say. There are elements of both that I agree with, and that is stopping me from making any major decision which one to support. I think I voted for both of them in a way at the last election. So
sure. So which of the other candidates do you feel you share a political identity with?
Well, that's rather difficult because for the very same reasons, there's a lot of them I can identify with. I guess I identify with some for different reasons. There's a lot that Ed especially, and to a certain extent Liam as well, really speak to in terms of union transparency and changing it from within that I really like. On the other hand, there's a lot that, for example, Liv and Alicia say that, in terms of what they bring to the table, their policy ideas and the like, that I really like.
Sure. Just some preferencing questions. Who would you preference in your top two, and who would you do last?
That's a very interesting question. So you're asking for two candidates that I potentially preference.
Yep.
This has not even come up in discussions between us yet. I think one of the great things about this election is a lot of the candidates are a close-knit group of friends. I consider people like Liv and Alicia some of my closest friends. So it's very difficult for me to say, oh, this is definitely a preference deal that's happening, because it's just never come up in discussions. But in terms, if I was to pick two people that I'd look at, Liv has been one of my closest friends for quite a while. I think we met each other on a campaign several years ago. Yeah, and yeah, we share a lot in terms of ideas for the union, plenty of union experience, shared union experience and the like. She started up the Quidditch Society. I was one of the executives that took over in the second year and got us to the World Cup and the like. So there's a lot of mirroring there, and I would have absolutely no problem with preferencing her.
Yep.
For very different reasons. Oh, not for very different reasons. That makes it sound awful. I'm not friends with this person. But for different reasons, I would consider Ed McMahon.
Yep.
Only because of what I was saying earlier in terms of those shared ideas about union transparency and the like. That's not to say I wouldn't consider it with any other candidate though. For those same reasons, I could say it for a wide variety of candidates.
Sure.
And then you wanted
last.
Oh, boy, I shouldn't have brought it up and hoped you'd forgotten about this, because this is a difficult one. Who would I preference last? It's very easy to say that I don't share a lot politically with someone like Callum Forbes. Obviously, he's made it rather clear where he stands. I'm a friend of his on Facebook, so I see him campaigning for the Liberals quite often.
Yep.
And obviously that politics doesn't really gel with my own.
Yep.
So while I hate to frame it in terms of, yes, I definitely preference him last, in terms of the political identities we have, I feel like we're the least compatible, I guess. And so based on that, I guess that would be the case. That's not to say he's necessarily the worst candidate.
Sure. Just one more on elections before we move on to issues.
Yep.
So who would you vote for if you are elected for president of the USU?
Yep. So this is also a good question.
Yep.
I guess first and foremost, I would like to say I don't want to count my chickens before they're hatched. I've been focusing entirely on making sure I've got a campaign to run, and then running that campaign. And then secondly, if I am lucky enough to be elected, I want to be able to talk to all the potential candidates. I'm basing this off on his list more than anything else because like nobody's talked to me about it personally. I think they all want me to. Well, if I am elected, they want me to get elected first before they discuss it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I find it a difficult question to answer only because I have not been elected yet, so I haven't been thinking about it. And these people haven't talked to me about what makes them a fantastic president yet because I haven't been elected. Like, I'd much rather have that full conversation with any potential candidate after the election.
Okay.
For sure. Let's move on to your views on the USU.
Yep.
And kind of the things you'd want to change about the USU, what you value right now. And we'll kick it off by, if you could talk about what you think the most important USU program or area of spending is and why you consider it to be so important.
Most important area. So, like, are you looking for something specific or something broad like CNS?
You can answer broad if you like, if you give that
Yeah,
justification.
so it's hard to go past clubs and societies when we're talking about what program the USU gives money to that gives the most back for students. I mean, from societies that hold drinks events once every week to societies that take their members overseas to represent in international tournaments. Like, clubs and societies can go a long, long way if given the right executive, the right support from the USU. And, like, it's the perfect example of the innovation that students can provide with a bit of support. So I would say the CNS program is definitely the most worthwhile aspect of the union that the union funds.
Okay, great. And now the inverse. And the hypothetical situation in which the budget of the USU loses $1 million, where would you cut that million from?
See, there's no aspect of the USU that screams, this is a waste of money. Because as much as I can point to departments or programs that spend a lot of money, for example, like, I'm assuming some people, not necessarily other candidates, but some people would answer debating to this because they receive, $330,000 or something like, something, yeah, 2,000, yeah, that's the one. Yeah. Long day, big numbers. But yeah, they receive a lot of money and people think, why are they receiving so much money? But there are reasons behind that, right? Like, they represent the USU internationally, they need accommodation and the like. So, like, even areas where you could say, oh, do they need that much money? Like, there are always reasons behind it, and there's no awful program that I think, yes, cut it away now. So if there was $1 million out of the budget, I'd have to make the decision of small cuts from everywhere. Like, there's nothing. I would just say, yeah, go on.
Sure.
As long as that was sustainable for the USU.
Okay, cool. And now moving on to kind of value-based, I suppose, principal decisions that you would have made as a board director if you were a board director over the last couple of years. We'll first look at Tom Rowey's, or the attempted dismissal and removal of Tom Rowey. If you were on board this year, how would you have voted when that came before the board? Yeah,
I'm glad that you added this year because I'm more than happy to say that my opinion has changed on this from when it first came up last year. So when it first came up last year, the information that we'd all heard was Tom Rowey had leaked a part of a confidential document and this was bad and therefore the executive was trying to have him removed. Based on that information alone, it didn't look good for Tom, I'll admit, because as an executive of the union or as a board director generally, there is something to say that you should be trying to keep documents like that confidential, right? But then we started hearing Tom's defense, and then we started hearing the court case and what happened with the report, and suddenly between the defense of this is actually in the student interest for XYZ reason, which I thought was valid, as well as the court case proving that the report wasn't fully confidential and procedural justice wasn't afforded to Tom in the first place, there was enough of a grey area to say that even if you think he had done something wrong, even if you thought, he hasn't acted in the student interest, he's done something wrong, there was enough of a grey area to say he probably shouldn't be just sacked off the board for that.
Sure.
Should he have been punished for it? Perhaps. There is the argument to say he did go against the will of his own executive and members of staff by releasing that, but he should not have been kicked off board. So presented with that motion as it was, yeah, I would have voted to keep Tom.
Can I ask, if the motion had been different and had been to sack Tom Rowey from the position of vice president but not remove him from the board, how would you vote on that?
That's a lot more interesting because I think there is an argument to say that because he did like potentially abuse executive privilege, like he could be kicked off for that. But I don't think I would have voted for him to be kicked out of that position, but like I'd be far more easily swayed. And like a lot of the rhetoric that surrounded that discussion was we shouldn't be able to kick him off because student democracy, right? So if that had changed and it was suddenly about his position as VP, a lot of that rhetoric might not have come up in discussion, and there would have been a lot more different kind of reactions to it. And so that of course like might have changed the decision, etc., etc. As it stands, I don't think I would have voted him off VP, but given the change in context, anything might have happened.
For sure. And can you talk to us about what you think the role of CEO in the union currently plays, and what role you'd ideally like him to play? Obviously the CEO is the hired by board to look after all the staff, right? So like to limit the amount of board directors just going up to certain staff, because obviously that creates a messy kind of structure. In terms of the role he is currently playing, it's very difficult for me to talk about what the CEO does day to day, only because I don't see it. We don't see it. All we can see is like go to a board meeting, up until the very last board meeting, see him give a finance report and a general report to the CEO. Like, it's very hard to evaluate his performance based off that. So I wouldn't feel comfortable in giving any other kind of evaluation of what he's done, whether that's good or not. Yeah. So I guess the ideal that the CEO should be working for is like facilitating student control through, I don't want to use the word control again, but through control of staff. Like if you are leading the staff from that position, then you should be working with the board to make sure that they are doing things in a student-oriented manner. Okay, cool. And what do you think of the policies and achievements of the current board, and if you could speak in particular to the presidency of Hannah Morris?
Okay, so this is a difficult question, only because this board has, unfortunately for the worse, I think, been overshadowed almost entirely by the Rowie case. And so a lot of the achievements have gone under the radar. Things like Health and Wellbeing Week being brought up off the ground, the Sex and Consent Day happening in semester 2. Like, these are great achievements made by board directors just elected. And if you'd gone to board meetings, you wouldn't have known about it, because all you'd be thinking about is like the tensions going on, why is Rowie not in the room, etc., etc. The presidency of Hannah Morris. Hannah is a good friend of mine. One of the reasons why I was not as vocal as others during the whole Rowie saga, I guess we'll say, is because I never talked to Hannah personally about it, and I felt like talking about that kind of situation without hearing both sides properly was problematic. And it's hard. It's really difficult for me to point out any other aspects of her presidency without referring to that first and foremost, which I think is unfortunate. Obviously the board believes in her and believes that she'd be a good president when voted in last year. At one of the most recent meetings, at least one director made it clear that he would have changed his mind, which I think is an unfortunate thing to say, but it did happen. So to evaluate Hannah's presidency, I think, is a bit difficult because of that overshadowing.
Yeah. You're a keen tweeter of board meetings.
Far too keen. Yeah.
How do you support the current policy of not being allowed to tweet the names of staff?
So I find this problematic only because there is an argument to say that while staff aren't directly answerable to students, they are in effect being paid by students.
Yeah.
They exist to create a union that is by us for us. So I think the main problem that has been with this whole you can't tweet about staff debate, it's been like, oh, what if tweeters get it wrong? What if it's mostly been me and somebody, a representative from One East Wales? What if I get it wrong? I think the problem with that isn't necessarily that. The problem isn't necessarily me maliciously attacking staff. The issue is that I find it very difficult to follow board meetings, just because there's no agenda ever circulated. We can't read the papers. Not saying I want to read all the papers. Obviously, there's confidential stuff in there. But because I'm not savvy to what's going on, there is going to be misconceptions. And so the answer to that isn't a blanket ban. It isn't censorship. It should be making sure we understand, those in the gallery understand what is going on in this meeting and being able to report effectively on it. I was thinking the last meeting, for example, Andrew Woodward gave a really, I want to say odd, but that isn't quite the word, but he gave a speech at the beginning of it about the Rowie situation. It touched a lot on what Robbie and Bibi brought up in their speeches. And I felt like I couldn't tweet on it, obviously, because it's a staff report. But what was stopping me from, say, when we went in camera, like about 20 or so minutes later, what was stopping me tweeting about it then? Well after the fact, when I had the time to evaluate it all. What if I had posted on Facebook or something like that? Yeah. The ridiculousness of that policy is only brought up when, what time do you allow before it becomes like not a live tweet and therefore okay to tweet.
Sure.
So I think the answer is definitely like better education for the people in the audience and anyone that potentially comes along.
Sure. We'll move on to some questions about your policies.
Yep.
So your on your Sydney Comedy Festival policy,
yep.
Do you think it's, I guess, quite a minor idea to be one of your major platforms, considering that it's something that happens once a year and it would just be a few events on campus?
Yeah, so obviously this is a policy that is timely more than anything else. The Sydney Comedy Festival is happening right now, and I've talked to a lot of students that know about it. They know it's down the road, and they would love to see it come onto campus to give comedy the boost that I think and they think it really needs.
Sure.
In terms of being a minor policy, I don't see it as that only because like it would be a major event for the USU on like for several weeks. You could have potential comedy shows in there, and so it's on par with any other kind of festival idea. So Health and Wellbeing Week, for example, you could say that like that's a major policy idea built from this idea that students should be better educated about health and well-being, obviously.
Yeah, sure.
But it's only 1 week. So, like, do you still make the same argument that it's not a major policy? I personally don't think so. It's more about the idea behind it, about like boosting awareness and thus enjoyment of comedy.
Cool. Can you tell us a bit more about Geek Week? What kind of events would run?
Cool. So this is actually an idea brought up between the presidents of the Quidditch and SUTEC societies.
Yeah.
SUTEC being the catch-all popular culture kind of society. And it was an idea formed between them, and they brought me into it and said, Cameron, this would be a really, really good idea. Should we do it? And we decided that there was like no time, it'd just be a couple of societies doing a couple of events. But the reason why I ran with it as an actual policy, something the USU should provide, is because, well, these are societies that are like not necessarily by design, but by the people that run them are somewhat introverted. So they run their own events. They have the same people turning up each week, and I know because for SUTEC and for Quidditch, for example, I'm one of them. I'm one of the ones that turn up week in, week out.
Yeah.
So I think like having a festival, putting all the events they do weekly on Eastern Avenue in front of everyone opens it up a lot more.
Yeah.
Destigmatizes it a lot as well, because there's a lot of people I know that would be interested in, say, playing Pokemon, but don't want to be associated with people that play Magic the Gathering, which is a ridiculous card game where you spend hundreds of dollars making a deck. Because of fear of being called names or whatever. So having this festival not only brings these societies to the front, it destigmatizes a lot of what they do.
Yeah.
And that's why I thought it was a fantastic idea to get these groups on campus to the forefront.
Sure. Just putting Geek Week up against some of the other weeks that run, there are things like Pride Week, International Week, Interfaith, Humanitarian. Do you think Geek Week is I guess, a big enough thing to devote a week to, as are these other issues that the USU has decided to do?
That's a valid question. Obviously, I guess in the more general sense, all of these board candidates putting forward policies are putting these forward as ideas and to be ironed out later on. So I would say if there are issues in terms of size, that would be ironed out at a board level, and I would merely be bringing it up. I personally think that there would be enough demand, first and foremost, as well as like enough people from different societies be willing to get involved, like to try and make a list of all the societies that would be involved: Quidditch, anime, SUTEC, StarCraft, and online gaming. You'd get SciSoc and Science Review, and like people associated with those still being very interested in what's going on. That's hundreds of students. That's hundreds of students potentially like on Eastern Avenue every day, showing off what they do in these societies, putting on fantastic events that everyone else can enjoy. So I think like size in terms of the people that would engage would be absolutely fine. Whether it's like whether you measure it up against other weeks and say, is it as big or not? That's something for a board to decide.
Sure. Moving to your internship policy. So the USU has international student internships and art collection. What other departments did you have in mind for your internship program?
So I think more to what you had said in terms of examples. I think it's great that, for example, the programs office and CNS office have so many students in there. Whether or not you call that an internship, I think is debatable. But like CNS office, it's a full job. Programs office, it's people running events for a year, say as campus culture or humanitarian programs director, or queer or women's events coordinators. Building on that, I think other departments would benefit from having more students involved with them. Marketing is one that comes to mind first and foremost. So we were talking earlier about the marketing. I think we were talking earlier about marketing strategy, perhaps. So like the marketing strategy that the USU is currently providing is a bit slick. I'll admit, only because like a VSU environment necessitates it. They need to be able to appeal to the widest audience imaginable. But I think that having extra students involved in that process, like as interns, paid interns, of course, would not only like give them fantastic experience, it'd help along that marketing process. And so like marketing is first and foremost, get a couple of students in there, because I think like you'd have. I think there'd be less issues as well. Obviously, we had the what was eventually the Fiesta party, which was the Day of the Dead party earlier, and like all that needed was like a couple students to say, hey, this is like the undercurrent of campus, right? Like this is what everyone thinks of this idea. Maybe we should step away from it.
Sure.
Can I ask you a couple of follow-ups on the intern thing?
Sure.
First thing, really simply, would the internships be paid?
As I said before, yes, they were definitely. Like, I do not believe in unpaid internships. I used to do an education degree, and I think, like, as much as you need like those kind of internships and pracs to get a good idea of how you'd be as a teacher and get that experience, having it unpaid is ridiculous. It's ridiculous to assume that students will be able to support themselves for 4, 5, 6 weeks without being able to work.
And do you see a move towards some students being able to replace staff within the union? So you talked about the role of students within the marketing team to be able to pick up the fact that the Day of the Dead party was a pretty big error. Do you see more of a role for students in those departments?
I would be wary of saying students will replace staff eventually. As much as this is a student-run union, staff fulfill an incredibly important role in providing a lot of experience, usually like a completed degree for one thing in whatever they're studying. So I would be wary of saying, yes, students will definitely replace staff. Like the idea behind internships is that you have these students working alongside the obviously experienced staff, and like it's a win-win situation for both, as I've outlined. And yeah, as I've said, I think it's incredibly important to give students those opportunities, and it's incredibly important for our union to be able to have more student input through like the more nitty-gritty mechanisms like that.
Cool. And you mentioned right at the start of the interview that you thought that you were similar to Ed McMahon and Liam Carrigan on issues of transparency. Can you talk about your policies on transparency?
Yep, sure. So as I was saying before, I think one of the big problems we've got in terms of trying to understand what the union is doing day to day is that we're trying to figure out through a formal board meeting, which is made primarily for staff and board directors to inform each other of what's happening, and us on the sidelines trying to understand it all. On my full policy statement, which will be available on my Facebook page shortly, I believe, there are targeted transparency policies. For word's sake, I couldn't put them on the 200 words. And first and foremost is like moving the union towards like obviously still having those formal board meetings and still being available for everyone and having like agendas and such available. But on top of that, having town hall style meetings every 2 to 4 weeks. And what would that would involve is the board, as well as any events coordinators or any other ambassadors for those certain roles, I guess, within the USU, as well as, of course, any staff that wanted to make any speeches and any members interested. And that would be the primary format by which the board, those representatives of those positions, staff and regular members can all converse in like a much less formal setting, and like it'd function very similar to an SRC meeting in that you do get office bearer reports, and then at the very end you have an open policy discussion where anyone can bring forward a motion saying, I think this would be a good thing for the SRC to do. In this case, it'd be like the union board at the next meeting should consider this idea. So essentially taking the forums that we've had like one transparency forum, I think, and a couple of ill-fated general forums last year, taking that, formalising it, inviting more people, making it relevant. Because that's a great way for students to learn about what the union is doing day to day without the issues of confidentiality and the like. Because if there's any issues of confidentiality, the board will say, we can't talk about that, let's talk about something else. As opposed to a board meeting where they just kick us out of the room for no reason. Oh, no, for a reason, but like we feel like it's no reason because we don't know.
Yeah, sure. You mentioned that it wasn't in the policies that you published in the candidate handbook but will be online. Does that indicate that the transparency policies that you bring forward aren't big priorities for you?
I would say very much not. Grammar, wow. So the issue that I had was when I was formulating my policy and I had like close to 1,000 words written, I'm like, well, how do I cut this down? So obviously I went down to titles and the like and short descriptions, but even that is still long. Like if you've got 5 or 6 different areas where you want to see change within the USU, like you can't obviously address them all in 200 words. So I instead went with the policies that would speak to the most amount of students, because it is a candidate handbook, it is available to everyone.
Sure.
And I made the judgment, like which may or may not be wrong, that transparency was an issue more for people that are far more involved in the process. People that are involved in clubs and societies at the moment, editors of ONI, things like that. And so they would be the kind of people to ask me in person or like make the effort to look at a Facebook page to find out about what I think about these issues, rather than the average voter, which might just look through that candidate handbook and just find those more like broadly targeted policies and vote based on that. So like it was a value judgment on what should go in the handbook as opposed to not, and like it's not an indication of what I have my priorities on or not.
Sure, so I'm right in saying that's more of an electoral decision than it was a principal.
Yeah, I was trying to avoid using it in those terms, but yes.
Cool, thank you. So you've got another policy around 24-hour study spaces, and there are already some existing, as well as some planned study spaces, including Fisher Library. I suppose, how many do you think we need on campus, and how can the USU provide those spaces to, say, compete with Fisher Library as a space?
Yep. So I think the important second part of that is the cafe aspect as well. Like obviously, the union provides food. Like for most students, that's their only interaction with the union. As I found out today by talking to a lot of people that aren't even Access members. So what the USU could provide here is a safe and secure way for students to like eat and drink, make sure they're well nourished all through the night. If they are doing that all-nighter before the assessment, they have to have in the next day. And I think the importance of that is quite obvious. It's a move a lot of other universities are making. I found an exchange student from England, from Manchester University, that just said they'd just implemented something similar over there. And so how would we compete? Well, first off, we'd have coffee available. So the 2 places where I see this working are home, which is already under renovation. All it would need is a bit of a tweak to how Footbridge Cafe looks, have like a window facing where the new student lounge is, and making sure that area is available 24 hours a day, which I don't think is too far of a stretch. Like, it's already under development, so just a slight change. The other location where I think this is viable is Carslaw, and again, that cafe is about to go under redevelopment, so all it would need is like this development to take into account that this will be open 24 hours a day, and then you've got the two already existing 24-hour spaces. You've got the loungy kind of lab as well as the all computers lab, and both of them with the coffee cart outside means that students don't have to travel too far if they do want something to eat, something to drink.
Okay, great. And I suppose underlying a lot of these questions about your policies, and I suppose the policies themselves, are a question about what you consider to be the role of the union on campus. Can you speak broadly to that?
Speak broadly to that, sure. So I've had to explain quite a lot today, which I found surprising, but then again I've been here for 3.5 years, what the union does. Because a lot of people say, USU, what's that? I've said, to make it really, really broad, food, clubs and societies, and big events like O Week, International Week, and those event kind of weeks. Because they're the biggest things that students will see, and it's most likely what students will most get out of their experience in the union. It's a service provider that encompasses so many different aspects of out-of-class activity and experience, and if I had to distill it down to a very short sentence, it's all about food, clubs, societies, and big events.
Okay, sure. And do you consider the USU to be a political organisation, or so do you think it should be pursuing progressive goals like being environmentally sustainable, say, or helping out groups that have traditionally been marginalised on campus?
So if you were to frame it in those terms you used at the very end, definitely. Should it be a political union? It becomes that by the nature of the people that are in control, like board directors, and so that's where we get these campaigns to be more environmentally friendly and the like come from, and I think that's totally fine. The only other political position I think you missed out on was VSU, versus Universal Student Unionism, which I also think is a perfectly fine position for the union to hold. Essentially, it should be a political union insofar as it's helping the aims of itself and its own members. And I see all of those, all the examples we've mentioned together to be compatible with that.
Yeah, for sure. How do you think the USU could better expand its member base or reach more students on campus than just those that currently hold access cards?
So this is a difficult question, only because the marketing department makes such an effort to reach out to every single student, and we try to make it so obvious. At every union outlet, we're like, this is the price you're paying, this is the access price, so you should probably get an access card. So I guess the only thing we could do, it's very hard to make that clearer. I guess if people are ignoring a 15% discount, that means they're either not interested or don't want to be or can't be union members, and I think that last part, can't be, is the issue, right? I really like what Alicia is proposing in terms of, if I understand this correctly, subsidised access memberships for low SCES students. I hope I'm not misrepresenting her policy, but even if I'm not, what I just said, what I think is a great idea, right? Trying to break down the barriers to entry into the union, because essentially we make it so clear that this is all the benefits of access membership. The only other reason people wouldn't be involved or get membership is laziness, which I doubt, or cost. And so I'm glad the union is slowly moving towards, ever so slowly, moving towards universal access by lowering the price each year.
Yep.
And I think from that we'll see a natural increase in membership numbers.
Okay,
Great.
Any more questions?
No, I think we're done. Yeah, thank you so much.
Fantastic. All right, thank you.
Good stuff,
Cheers.
man.
Thank you.
Know your stuff.
Yeah, well, you'd like to think so.